Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Burlington Beyond. Welcome back, all you friends. Tonight we have a special meeting. Last night ended the third session of town meeting, and tonight we have all town meeting members who are there at the meeting, attending, participating, as well as our normal panel that we have every week. To my left over here is John Glenn, and next to me is Adam Sinesi. On my right-hand side is Ernie Zablonsky and Steve Stam. We invited Steve and Ernie because they participated and offered a lot of information to everyone. So we asked them to come on our show tonight and to continue the type of discussion. Steve, let's start with you. What did you think of the town meeting that just concluded last night?
I thought it was an improvement over past town meetings with respect to the participation and thoughtfulness of the town meeting members, but I think we still have a ways to go. I think we need better information from the administration. There were several items that people were just confused on. That shouldn't happen. If the information was available, they wouldn't have to ask those questions. We had the last minute article, which was the last one, on planning, a definition of theaters. I venture to say nobody really understood going into that why that article was even there. There was no information on that.
And then I think we ended up voting on an amendment to an amendment.
That's right. And
I thought we were voting on the amendment,
confused.
but it turned out to be the amendment of the amendment.
Well, I was aware of part of that process, and the Land Use Committee took issue with it being presented at all. It was offered as a warrant article as a favor, I suppose, to the proponent, the owner of the theater, for the discussion to take place at the Planning Board and then at the Land Use Committee. And the ultimate resolution of a simple statement, as was provided by the Land Use Committee, making sure that the liquor license portion of this, which obviously was the driving force for the question, remained in the hands only of the selectmen where it currently is. Who wanted to have that separate. That's what the Land Use Committee wanted to do, and I think it ended up being resolved in an appropriate fashion. At the same time, none of it should have been done at that time. Nobody had the same amount of information. I just happened to have been at a couple land use meetings, so I know. But if everybody else was not at the land use meeting, this was all a big surprise, and why are you asking should have been the normal reaction during town meeting.
Adam, welcome to town meeting. It was your first meeting last night?
Yes, it was.
I'm sorry, it was your third. It was your first town meeting.
Right, no, I understand.
So what's your opinion of town meeting as a new guy on the block?
It was extremely interesting learning about how the town spends much of what we spend and how it's appropriated and the voices that go into the process. One of the things that I had heard going into town meeting was that pretty much everything gets passed, and that was pretty much to be expected. I'm not saying I voted for everything, and I'm not saying everybody who was there voted for everything, but pretty much everything that went before town meeting did get passed. So it's almost in some way, shape, or form, I guess within the community there's a lot of consensus, but at the same time there was a lot of discourse back and forth on various issues, but in the end everything seemed to be a foregone conclusion.
Well, actually, when you understand how much of the process or how many more things in the budget process and the project development process that takes place over the whole year, you would be quite surprised to find out how many things have been eliminated to get to the point where there is agreement. And the eliminations come as a matter of how much money there is available. There is some prioritization, and you would also be surprised at how many things get pushed off into the future and are not attended to for a long period of time, and you would ask, why not? So it's just like the issue of the cinema definition. If you were involved with one of the committee meetings, you're going to know more about the overall process than just the town meetings. I've learned that if you attend only the town meetings, but there's no reason for having the town meeting because everybody voted yes. But if you understand what takes place throughout the course of the year, especially in planning board meetings and land use committee meetings, there are a lot of subjects that are worn out before they get to a vote requirement.
John, I'd like to get to your opinion too on the town meeting that just concluded.
Well, I thought it actually went faster than I expected. But, it's the first time I actually got up and had my share of questions since being a town meeting member now for 6 years.
6 years, wow.
And there's a couple of things, the Grandview farm, after the discussions we've had on that one for God knows how long, the amount of money the town ended up, putting into that facility, with the understanding that it was always going to pay for itself. I was a little shocked by the fact that we're going to be financing that going forward, and I think that's a discussion that needs to continue. But and the solar panel discussion I thought was fairly straightforward. I was surprised that we didn't get information on that a long time ago, because solar energy has been discussed for a long period of time. The credits are running out at the end of the year, but it's something the town should have addressed, and it certainly had a lot more information and probably brought it to us a little bit quicker so that people could have been a little bit more aware of what the pros and cons were. I mean, it made infinite sense to do it, but I just think it was very poorly presented to us. And some of the other articles that come before us, town spends an awful lot of money. I still kind of, look at, taxes going up every year, and I just don't seem to think that there's, enough concern about the taxpayer, and it's just like, let's keep on pushing forward a lot of programs. And I wish they'd brought up a discussion about the fire station, not that we're going to do anything with it just yet, but I think that's a discussion in terms of how we're going to do some of the construction that we have to do going forward.
I was kind of surprised about that fire station because
we need a new Department of Public Works. I'm sure the police station's going to be crying for something new in the not too distant future. We have that piece of property over in Meadowbrook Road, I think it is. Is that big enough to put a consolidated facility in there? Would that make sense? So you have an auxiliary fire department, you just move DPW up the street. Could you put the police department in there as well? How desperate are we to have to move that facility at any given point in time? They've been there for 30 years now? That was built in the 80s, I think, when they moved. So, those are things I'd like to see, the ongoing discussion, because that's going to be a fairly significant capital budget expenditure when it comes. And to me, I think you can lump some of those things into a better piece of property, or, build one facility and really do a service to the town by not, going nuts and piecemealing all the different, political groups in town, or the little segments of I want this, I want that, and let's have a little bit more logical plan how we do that. So
I agree that the fire station, that should be, the discussion of how that's going to be built and constructed should be an open discussion. We should at least get updates and what they're thinking. But what I think is going to happen is just like 33 Center Street. They're just going to say, okay, here's our proposal.
yeah, and I was shocked by that one too.
Vote for it too.
I was shocked by that one too. I was stunned by the cost it's going to take to renovate a 4,000 square foot facility. I was like, what, might as well raise the whole building and start from scratch. It would have been cheaper.
I think that's why I voted against it, because I asked about those renovation costs, and it was going to be
$1.7 million.
Yeah, and the total cost is going to be over $2 million.
I mean, that's
So
Actually 2.4 when you consider the purchase price.
That's right.
And if you take the view that this is all to generate additional space, and nobody answered the question yesterday about how many additional square feet were going to be made available for COA programs. You're going to add some portion of the $3 or $4 million that it'll cost to refurbish that building. So I think we're in the neighborhood of $500 to $600 per square foot for the additional space for COA activities.
which is nuts. Which is absolutely nuts.
and then throw on top of
However,
that the fire
somebody made a
department, too.
decision. Well, town meeting just agreed to go along with what was determined to be an appropriate thing. The biggest part of that $1.65 million is the elevator that needs to go. The original plan, by the way, all of the things that you itemized of an area of interest of yours, if you would come to the capital budget meetings, this is the subject that we attend to, the 10-year capital plan, and then you would be seeing each of these things sliding out into the future, because it's very difficult to plan any of those things when you don't have any land to build any of those things. And then if you start thinking about what it takes to tear down an existing building to replace it with a new one, then the problems escalate
Sure.
out of hand. The elevator originally was going to be outside the foundation footprint today. And that was going to be the major cost of that $1.6 million.
I assumed that, but they didn't break it out.
There was no breakdown, and Steve had been trying to get at least a summary breakdown, a task schedule. Well, he alluded to some of that yesterday, but there wasn't any dollar figure on any of the tasks mentioned. It's equivalent to about 6 regular average residences in town. That's what that building is going to end up costing.
Mm-hmm. I know.
And if you think of it in those terms, it's very difficult not to say that we've been wasting a lot of money on that facility.
Well, you have to look at it and compare it with what does commercial real estate in that general area cost, and this is going to end up costing us, the taxpayers, a lot more than the typical commercial real estate goes for by the time that all the upgrades are finished and you add in the cost of the facility. One thing that I would like to do, just
Sure.
changing the subject, for I think that our new moderator did a terrific job trying to balance the focus on the subjects, but still give people the latitude to say what they need to say. And so I think that is a big plus. And
Oh, I agree. I think
yeah.
Sally did a great job.
Yeah.
I agree.
I would agree too.
There was a comment that the atmosphere was palpably more
Improved.
pleasant by somebody, and I thought that was a very appropriate word to use.
Well, we also concur that town meeting members need more information on a lot of these bigger issues. I wish they could make it available to those who are interested. You don't want to send out the 3.5-inch notebooks, 2 of them, to every town meeting member, but those who would have an interest in knowing more about the budget, knowing more about particular issues, should be allowed to have that information. The same book that Ways and Means gets, I think, should be made available to everybody.
And in that vein, I was disappointed in the turnout at the Ways and Means session that they held to brief town meeting members on the budget process. I would have expected a lot more town meeting members to show up at that, and I realized it was during the evening. It was relatively close to town meeting, but it was a very worthwhile session, and I would encourage Ways and Means to do that again. I think, and hopefully we can get better attendance, because I got a much better understanding of how things were done, the good and the bad.
One thing related to attendance that I was a little surprised by as a first-time town meeting member is, and I was surprised by the people that left early and just didn't show up. I saw a lot of name tags and names that weren't signed in. I ran once and came within 4 votes shy. I asked for the position, and obviously there were other people that claimed to be interested in the position. And then to sit there on the second night and see that there were a lot fewer seats filled, if you asked for a job, did you ask for the job in your own self-interest, or did you do it to represent your precinct? And if there are various issues that just don't interest you, I think it's still incumbent upon the person to show up and vote.
Well, there may be other reasons that somebody can't attend, but
Of course, I
but
understand
usually
that.
the first night is close to full attendance. Often it's not. There are always health problems that
Of course.
interfere from time to time. But I think it's generally noticed by a lot of people that attendance at the meetings alone can't give you a whole lot of understanding about what's taking place, for the reason that we've been talking about. There's very little information in that red booklet to tell you what it is that you're voting on. And by the way, everything seems to be already predetermined, as you pointed out or feel. It really is incumbent on every town meeting member to spend time to get to know what the issues are and get to know what the details are in order to be able to be at least better informed themselves, if not to be able to proselytize an appropriate direction for others. It's not a job, but if you want to do it right, it can take a great deal of your time.
I can imagine. You obviously had the capital budget committee. What type of, how much time does that take up per week? How many is there a meeting at least once a week?
There are required meetings prior to town meeting. Town bylaw says by February 1st, we have had to have met with each of the town departments and gone over their plans for the following year. In the past, those meetings frequently took place within a week or two of town meeting.
Okay.
And the kind of information that we got about the cinema, it was routine to get that kind of information on the entire budget. And trying to schedule a meeting with the school committee, for example, 2 months in advance of them voting on their own budget is not possible. They can't meet, so they won't. So it boils down to every department that is going to have a capital expenditure for us. DPW, the school committee, the fire department frequently has them, not always. The police department always has a few cars that need to be replaced. We discuss those, plus the equipment like ammunition and belts and other whistles of their equipment requirements. The recreation department always has one or two either projects that require some refurbishment or something of that nature, a building. They also have the longest standing request for a new facility at Overlook Park called the Garage, which was built in the 1940s, and everybody is shocked about the condition of that facility. Even the police department that wants a new police station agrees that that should come first, ahead of DPW and everything else. But there was an attempt to combine those two facilities, but we haven't found a place to do it. And we've run out of places to do it, and every time we've suggested areas in town where the land is available to do it, it's not in the right place, so we don't want to go there. There is only one such acreage, and it's at the end of Route 3, at the interchange, at the end of, what's the name of that street, Wheeler Road.
Burlington Canyon?
Yes, the Burlington Canyon. There was enough acreage there to put, for example, a DPW garage, a firehouse, and a recreation department, but it's in the corner of Burlington, and it's not in the central place, and it's not convenient. So where it is available, we don't want to do it. The rest of the places where we'd like to do it, it's not available, automatically increases the cost and delays the projects.
Well, some of the bigger issues that we tackled over the last few nights, I guess it all came in just one night, was the decisions to implement the green energy, the solar panels, first on top of the schools and on 2 of the schools, and then on other various buildings in town. I'm not quite sure what we voted on, just to allow them to go into negotiations. We weren't allowed to be part, or not even allowed to up or down the negotiations. But trust us and give us the authority.
No, the only thing we did was give them the authority to begin contractual negotiations. When there is a project to be in place, all of the avenues that we will have as citizens and or as town meeting members will now be concentrated in planning board hearings. It will go through a normal project definition, project permitting exercise at the planning board. And those are going to be public hearings, and there will undoubtedly be more than a few repeat ones there. So I think it's a logical progression, and when it comes to solar energy, there's a variety of towns, like Lexington would like to be its own utility or have its own utility. No town has been able to start a municipal utility since the 1940s. That's the last time it was done. It's not an advisable thing to do when you consider the complexities associated with it. And having somebody negotiate contracts, that's also a smart thing to do, because if you haven't done it, you shouldn't begin to try.
That was another article that passed a couple years ago, where Burlington was going to sell the power to its citizens. It was going to be an option. We could buy it through the town. And that did pass town meeting. My last
Yes,
recollection about it was that
that's a power bundler, just getting a smaller or a better rate for it, and that's in effect as far as I know. There is a small amount of savings to the town and to the residents because it's being bought. I don't know how fully it's been implemented yet.
Well, yeah, the promise on that was that they were going to turn around and offer the residents the option to buy power from the town or to buy power from the town supplier. That hasn't happened, so I can only assume that they're still working on it and haven't taken it to fruition. Either that or they've given up and just haven't said anything.
But you've all gotten letters of offers for buying your power from XYZ company, I'm sure. This is the same thing on a larger scale with a particular group who are in the business of assembling those small power agreements into a bigger one that presumably should get you a slightly better rate. By the way, the first proposal for a solar plant that I'm aware of in town was about 6 years ago to put a 2 megawatt facility on top of this building. And it was not attended to in any way, shape, or form. There were no discussions whatsoever about it. So it's been in the process for at least 6 years.
Now,
There was no rush
If I
yesterday.
could ask you, was that approved by town meeting?
No, it was never brought to town meeting because
brought.
A, the school committee did not have town meetings approval to go into a negotiation. NRG was the company that was making the offer to build it. I thought it was kind of skinny because it's a 7-acre roof, and I figure you should be able to get at least 50% of the roof, not just a quarter of it. So I thought it should have been closer to 3.5 to 4 megawatts. But no action was taken on the proposal. It has in effect been, that sounds like a good idea, but
Why is that? Any idea?
why?
Yeah.
Well, it requires the same kind of thing that we were discussing yesterday. They just did not take action on it.
So as much as we were in a rush to get it passed so we could meet the deadline yesterday, that deadline was really sat on for years?
No, the deadline wasn't set on. You knew it. It's a different program. What was offered at that time, somebody was going to provide the capital, operate and maintain it, and the power would be consumed entirely by the town. That is the cleanest way of doing it. You know, basically there are 3 ways of taking advantage of this. You own the facility, you have somebody else own and maintain it for you, or you do something in between. The amount of money that you're looking to save is 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the distribution cost. And the amount of gas that's displaced. Those are the positive parts. The negative parts is what the capital is and what the capital costs.
In this particular case, what Larry said is correct. In other words, we've authorized them to go and negotiate the contracts. Unless there are significant expenditures in the future, which they don't envision by what they've said, that it would not come back to town meeting. But that doesn't mean it's a fait accompli. In other words, if they don't get a contract that they like, they could just cease negotiations. If we don't get the financial returns, they could cease negotiations, or it just might not make the deadline because negotiations tend to carry out quite a bit of time when you have some difficult issues.
I also noticed that they call these pilot programs.
I'm not
It's
sure
part of
that
the term of the warrant
They
article.
did.
And so I'm wondering, are there plans that if this takes off, it's really going to take off across the town, going to get more buildings?
No, the
I just
issue, the issue is how far you're going to take this, and it will be determined purely on economic advantages. We have a limited amount of space, but I did some years ago, back when this proposal was presented by NRG to the school committee, looking at available sources, appropriate roofs, a certain percentage of the roofs in town you could probably get 35 megawatts of power, solar power, generated through various facilities around, mentioning that the town could use 7. If you look at the number of houses that are employing them now, it's not an unreasonable number to get to. Leahy Clinic said that they are going to do their garage to emulate what Oracle has done. And they're going to do their lower parking lots. You won't be able to see it from Mall Road. It's going to be only people who have a problem of visual impact if they're going over it with a helicopter. In that case. In other parking lots, it'll be different, and it needs to be vetted. And the only place that we are going to be able to deal with those projects, I think, is at the planning board stage. That's the last time we may or may not be involved in any of it, and some projects might be deemed sufficiently new that it would have to come before town meeting. The Oracle project was discussed at town meeting, and one individual got up and pointed out that it's the best location for a solar plant in town, and they acted on it. And I'm happy to have said it.
Okay, sort of if we could just get to a couple other issues. What amazed me the most was the fact that we had $9.1 million in free cash. Free cash being the money that is left over, or that we raised more money than we spent. In 2015, it was certified as free cash in October, and somehow that free cash all got spent in these last 3 meetings. I had a little note for the chairman of Ways and Means where I called it a slush fund, and he strenuously objected, and I decided not to respond because when the money had run out, I figured I won that little debate there. Anyway, to not put money away when you have $9.1 million, if you're not going to give it back to the taxpayers, then it should go into something like stabilization fund. That's our savings account. It takes 3/4 of town meeting to vote to use that money. So it's when you put it into that account, it's probably going to be there because it's hard to get that number of people supporting the same thing. So that's what kind of amazed me about these last few meetings, that we didn't put anything into savings this budget meeting, but it was all went into other projects.
You need to look at that as from a glass half full standpoint. One, the fact that we have money in free cash means that people were able to accomplish, in most cases, their goals without spending all the money that was allocated to do that. And two, the fact that that money is now being channeled to specific budget items means that those budget items don't have to be paid again by the taxpayer. In other words, it effectively reduces the amount of taxes that each of our residents is going to have to pay. So, I think the system's working as it should. One thing that everybody needs to be aware of, town meeting members and residents, is we have a number of major projects and a number of major expenditures that are going to be facing us in the future. And we need to have a good plan on how to address them. There are capital items that was mentioned, such as the new buildings, potentially school renovations. We mentioned the HR building upgrade, the 33 Center Street, fire station, potentially police station, DPW, sidewalks, sewer system.
And don't forget the swimming pool.
Yeah, I saw that downstream. Where's that coming from, and where's that supposed to go?
The planning,
In back of the recreation building.
the planning
at the field.
board meetings on the long-term plan, which is a requirement that the state puts on
No, I know
each
that.
town planning board, went out with a survey to see what it is that you would like. And the number one response by the citizens to that survey was, we want a swimming pool.
I don't really object to that. I just know, when I was reading through the long-term capital budget requirements and saw that little note in there, I was kind of raised my eyes a little bit. I think it's a good idea, actually.
My conversation with rec committee was, well, couldn't we find a corporate sponsor to build this indoor swimming pool? And it's going to be with a wading pool also, and I think they even want to stick some gym equipment in there. So there's
Well-
quite a lot of plans being talked about, but I'm hoping that's where we could find like a corporate sponsor, name the building after.
One of our
Instead of
former
fully funding
recreation commissioners, Jack Farron, in fact, had a plan in place to look for corporate sponsors for a field house, which would include a swimming pool and an indoor track and a whole bunch of other things. The idea of locating it in the field behind the COA building. But the idea of finding $20 million to do something of that nature is a pretty big hill to climb.
Yeah, it sure is.
And then the question is, although it's the it's the number one requirement, or people are thinking about it, are people willing to pay the additional amount of money in their taxes in order to get it done? You mentioned 20 million, and Ernie has done some calculations that for each million that we spend, each individual taxpayer has to fork up $50.
Yeah, the average homeowner, resident taxpayer, is his share of $1 million expenditure is $50, and that comes about from 60% of the revenues come from elsewhere. The residents pay $400,000 of that $1 million, and there's roughly 8,000 households that make a contribution to it, so the $50 gets to be an easy calculation. What is a problem is that for some things, every resident knows that my $50 contribution is at least giving me something back. For the roads, for example, the roads are in pretty good condition compared to others. When we put up $3 million, my $150 is doing a good job keeping the snow removed and the cracks filled and so on. I can appreciate that. But if I'm making a contribution of $50 into a place where nobody can touch the money for 30 years, and then it's going to be reserved for a narrow part of the overall population, I have a great deal of difficulty looking at that gift as something that I'd like to do. Like Monty Pearson pointed out, the $50 gift could have been far better used in putting more sidewalks, which is among the top things that the residents have indicated to the planning board survey that they would like after the swimming pool.
Oh, I agree with that, absolutely.
And not-
Sidewalks, okay.
And not enough people actually go through that. I have to apologize for the fact that 4 years ago when we were discussing this, that the OPEB thing and some of these other long-term plans I thought was going to be relatively straightforward. Yes, that's personal economics as far as I'm concerned. If it works for me, it should work for the town. And I fully convinced that I was wrong then. I was sort of ambivalent for a year or two, but now I'm absolutely convinced it's inappropriate on a number of different levels, local, state, and national levels. On a societal basis, there's something basically unfair about it, and it needs to be corrected to be equivalent to, over a transition period, corrected to whatever is available to the general populace, which is considerably less rich a basket of benefits than is available to
We're talking about medical retirement benefits there.
and retirement benefits and for that matter salary, because over the last 5 or 10 years it has turned out that the average salary, the median salary of federal, state, and local employees is between 5 to 10% higher than the average salary that apply to the
The private sector.
private sector.
Which was never the case 30 years ago.
And when those programs were put into place, and this is when the problem started, approximately 40 years ago, those programs were put together in order to level the playing field in favor of the municipal workers and the government workers. Not enough people were going into those fields. And it did its job well, but they didn't notice the correction about 20 years ago, what happened in the private sector.
Basically flattened out, and municipal salaries continue to climb at
Yeah. Well, the
beyond the rate of inflation even.
problem that I saw some statistics recently where it said it's going down on a regular basis. Over the last 5 years, it's dropping a percent a year. $1,000 a year out of 55 is now to 50. Is the median salary in the private sector. And unfortunately, the things that cloud this is there was some information the other day in the paper about how many people spend 50% of their income on housing in various towns, and Burlington is among the lowest. But the number of people who are in that group tend to be seniors, and they're the ones that are on fixed income and paying. So whenever you look at a broad spectrum and compare taxes, we always come out very well. That doesn't mean, however, that we can't do better. As Steve mentions, there's big charges coming, and you cannot keep on spending at will.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the medical benefits, which is, it was a major item of discussion at town's meeting. And I'm not sure if people realize, but when you look at the medical benefits that we pay to employees, current employees, current retired employees, and now, in addition to that, paying on a trust fund for future retirement benefits, we're currently, right now, that equates to 13% of our total budget, and it's growing at a significant rate based on the plans that have been outlined so far.
What are those plans that have been outlined?
Basically, is to fund a minimum of $500,000 a year, increased at 9.3% every year. And we've been funding more than that. We've been putting in typically $1 million a year or more for the past couple of years. Now, and they want to do that for 30 years. And the goal is to have this trust fund build up with those 30 years of contributions so that the trust fund will pay for all post-employee benefits in the future. Post-employee, basically retirement benefits. And when you look at what happens by increasing 500,000 by 9.3% every year, I have a graph here that I put together, but it basically starts to increase exponentially. And by the end of 30 years, each household on the post-employment benefits is paying $500 a year. Okay, and for the total employment benefits, including current employees, we'd be paying approaching $2,200 a year. So this is an issue that definitely needs to be addressed. And the question is, how do you address it? And you know, we talked a little bit about this, but the first thing you do is address it at the source. And that's a program that's equitable to all parties, but reduces the town's commitment for post-employee benefits and for potentially current employee benefits for new employees. And this is not by squeezing current retirees or near-term retirees. It's looking at people that have been recently hired and starting to work so that their retirement is not quite that high in the future or burdensome to the town. The other thing is on the trust fund, it doesn't need to pay 100% in the future, and it needs to be looked at in conjunction with all of the other major capital expenditures that the town's looking at. It would be very one-sided to fund this trust fund at the expense of either neglecting or burdening taxpayers with all of the upcoming capital expenditures that we're going to have to do in addition to that. So we need to find a happy medium.
There's a variety of ways of looking at this. I consider it a surtax. And it's, according to the legislature, a voluntary program. It's a voluntary tax, except what they're doing is shifting their responsibility of correcting this to town meeting, because the minute the town meeting votes, yes, we're going to do this, we have now made sure that it's law in our town. We're the guilty parties here for doing this, not the state legislature. And if you look at the state's website discussing OPEB, it has a number of things that they're concerned. There's 4 points, but 2 stick out in my mind, and I remembered them. The first one is we're concerned about the fact that this will grow to be such a large amount that in many communities, other services will have to be cut. In other words, we're taking away from the schools and we're going to put it to the retirees. That balances what we do on a social basis or societal basis for the entire country all the time. We're looking at these competing demands. The other one, which was nicely stated, was there is a problem in having this, a problem in fairness in having these kinds of programs for the general populace not being able to access similar programs. If the state recognizes it, it's obviously a political problem to begin the process as we're talking about it, and I come to the conclusion it's necessary for us to begin that problem locally and also to prod the development or preparation of legislation at the state level, because I don't think you can do it only locally, and I don't think you can do it only in the state. You need to do it collectively on both tracks.
Well, if I understand, a big part of the expense here is it's post-employment benefits, but municipal workers go on Medicare and Medicaid at 65 like the rest of us, and that this is to cover from the time they retire to whenever they go on the federal retirement system for medical benefits. Is that not accurate?
No, that's not.
It carries all the way through?
The post-employment benefits, or the OPEB thing, is that it's the town's share of supplemental health care insurance. When they get to the 65 and get qualified for Medicare, they are paying their Medicare premium, and we're paying 80% of their supplemental care. And if you calculate that on a per person basis, so using what Tufts has as a premium locally and is claimed to be the best plan in the country, that means each retiree costs us $1,600, roughly speaking. Actually, it's $1,460 if you take away a few other things.
What do you mean, 1460?
$1,460
Per
a
year?
year is
Okay.
the premium requirements for the employees. There are approximately 1,500 people who are beneficiaries of that plan. It should only take about $2 million, but there's 5.6 million according to one set of information I saw. And when I asked our treasurer for the specific data about who belongs into which category, it doesn't seem to be available. We need to, among the things that we need to understand is exactly what it is that we're paying for, because it's not clear to me that we know exactly what the benefits are. If it was, as I'm talking, a number that should be, from the language we've been given, $1,460 per person, then we should be having 3,300 people on that beneficiary list, not the 1,400 that we do have. The numbers don't match. I'm not comfortable finding a solution for this without knowing what the exact numbers are.
Anybody else have any solutions for funding OPEB? Is this something we should be doing? Should we be putting together a $35 million account for future retirees?
Well, I think on some level, a lot of these current employees were hired with a promise that there would be a benefit to them. And I think it's important for our town's reputation and for our bond rating to come through on that promise. But there needs to be a better deal negotiated as we move forward. They need to do something with new hires to get more with the times, and obviously rebalance the economy as from a perspective of the public sector versus the private sector. Obviously, the last few years, the last 10 years, I would say, or over the duration of time, but I know since I've been in the workforce over we'll say the last 15 years or more, each year the cost that I put into my health insurance seems to go up. And, while the benefits...
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the benefits get lowered,
Yeah.
and no one seems to be negotiating a better deal for me. and for the rest of the taxpayers. So I think we all need to suffer an equal share of the burden. Again, we can't pull the rug out from under people that are about to come to retirement age. That's just not what we're looking to do. One of the things that I found problematic with town meeting was that, you know, as I looked around the room, I realized that many of the people that were voting for these OPEB benefits, that I feel to vote for the OPEB benefits was to fail to address the elephant in the room moving forward. And many of the people that were voting on behalf of the benefits were people that are currently employed by the town. And it strikes me as a conflict of interest.
Well, actually, it's not, because most of those people who are currently employed won't be around 30 years from now to benefit from that trust fund any more than I'm likely. I will only be 122 when the cost benefit of my making these gifts will come back to me as lower taxes.
You bring a good point.
And the issue actually obtains to the employees as well. For example, I'm not sure what the law says, and I was talking to our town attorney about this. It's somewhere it seems to be that the state has ordered towns to provide 50% of the cost of health share, but I haven't seen the language that says it is for the current employees, and it also implies or applies to retirees. I haven't seen that language. I asked the attorney, he said he didn't see that language either. And now it also depends exactly what it is that's covered. If it's covering supplemental health insurance, why doesn't it cover long-term health care? Because it's supplemental health care insurance. That would only triple the premiums that we would be having to pay for retirees, so why don't we consider that? If you look at the actual cost that the retirees are incurring, that means what they put into the tax contributions, the $50 per person for every $1 million that's put, and that's a $600 contribution on healthcare cost of us now in our tax bill. They're paying, part of that tax money is going or coming back to pay their premiums as well. You look at their Medicare premiums, and then what's left over, it turns out is not 50%. So legally, if that is in the language, written into the language that it must be 50%, an enterprising lawyer could easily look at this and calculate that we only have 47%, therefore we should be increasing the amount that we're paying for, not decreasing it. There are ways to legitimately look at this and interpret, depending upon how that law is written, that would cause the problem to be bigger, not smaller. And that has to be understood and corrected as well in the way the law is written. I have yet to find the legal language that describes it, and I'm absolutely certain if you use common understanding of English in reading that, you're making a mistake as to how much latitude there may be in actually exercising that law. Okay. Just another part of the problem.
Ways and Means, at least one person, Ways and Means, has indicated to me that once they get their consultant's report, which is due in June, that is going to look forward over the next X number of years, that they would have a public meeting, an open meeting, to discuss the medical insurance and the medical retiree, cost.
I hope we can hold them.
Issues.
I hope we can hold them to that.
Well,
that meeting.
We definitely should. I mean, I think they would like to have that meeting as well. I think that would be a great meeting.
I have, in case I forget, a question that you can all ask. The first question to ask is, what would the proposed or projected unfunded amount be if you reduce the contribution from 80% to 50%? I'm sure that's not done. Nobody is looking at a range of options of what would occur if certain things were adjusted. So far, the only things that have been done is small incremental changes in what the ratio of the town contribution and the employee or retiree contribution is, and small small changes in the deductible levels of the plans. Although there are 4 basic plan options, I'm not convinced that I have seen the information that they're as cost effective as the one that I'm using. I think I get a better deal than the town is getting, and for our employees, and that might be just a residual problem from when we were insuring or self-insuring for the entire staff and the retirees. Now we're sort of in between, and I'm wondering whether or not some creative folks at the insurance companies are taking advantage of us, and we just haven't noticed.
Well, you know, one sure way to increase the OPEB cost is to continue hiring, as we have this year.
Yeah.
About 9 new employees.
Yeah.
We're trying to deal with this retirement benefits.
But I know 2 have left, and they won't have retirement benefits, so it balances out.
But they'll still be replaced.
Yes.
So anyway, that's I think another aggravating factor. We're continuing to hire when we haven't figured out their retirement yet.
No.
Another
Okay,
thing I'd like
people-
to go ahead.
People need to recognize that OPEB and our commitment is just one item that we need to plan for. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to fund an OPEB trust account and ignore trust accounts for the schools, the sidewalks, the sewer systems, et cetera. I mean, if you're going to create a trust account, then you should treat everything equal. There's no reason why one is any different than the other.
I couldn't agree more, and that ends up being, as long as the trust fund is reserved for a civic purpose that affects all equally, that should be okay. If this trust fund is designated like OPEB for a particular purpose which is not available to all, then I think ultimately it is not a sustainable or an acceptable thing to be doing. If we renamed that, or just, and this is something that might come to town meeting sometime in the future, because as I'm sure you're aware, when people did have these kinds of trust funds in the past, they were just large pools of money that were lying fallow, and financial engineers were able to access them and make sure that a lot of companies went bankrupt, etc. There's no reason to expect that similar thing can't happen if there is this large pool of money available. It's a big asset, and it's movable by a 3/4 vote at town meeting.
Well, that's a good question. Is it something that town meeting could vote to take money back out of that for general purposes?
I don't see why not. We could have a warrant article, and we had everybody agreeing that we should, for example, take the $400,000 that we voted to put into it yesterday and repurpose it next year for healthcare premiums, the OPEB requirement next year. We don't have to wait
Well,
30 years to use that money.
I would
true.
have thought the same thing about our excess funds in the medical trust fund. And yesterday we found out that we couldn't use those for anything else but medical without getting union agreement.
Well, that's true, but I
Yeah.
think we could have asked them to go back and negotiate. I got to ask you this question. Do you feel that question that I had asked, was that out of line, asking for it to go back into free cash instead of? But it sounds like the town has a lot of needs.
No,
And we were all already very kind to OPEB this year.
It wasn't out of line as a question, but you couldn't make the motion because it couldn't be done at this point in time.
Contractual
Yeah.
obligation.
Do you remember right before I made that motion, or tried to, I asked John Petrin, well, could we get back to the unions and say, here's what was approved, and see if they would agree to it? And that agreement that we made with the unions was before we started putting in these large sums as a line item. 500,000 in February, 500,000 last week. That was before we did those type of things. They made this agreement to take back some money from the healthcare fund.
I think
And now that we're funding it, I think the union should be pretty happy with town meeting, what they've done for them.
Oh, of course. If you're getting an advantageous pat in the back, as it were, on a continual basis, you'd like to keep that as long as possible, even though it's not necessarily fair with respect to others. I think what you're hitting upon is what sort of warrant article should we, and it is incumbent on us as town meeting members to ask that question in the form of a warrant article and put it in front of the entire board. On on occasion, we have been persuasive enough under those circumstances to have a policy change take place. Just on this question of what you can do with this insurance money, is there any reason that we couldn't use some of the OPEB funds now to pay for next year's OPEB requirements? If we're paying it each year, why not do it now? There's no restriction that I understand that we have to wait 30 years. That was just an actuarial exercise to say that, well, over that period of time, we might be able to have enough money that would generate interest on the order of $5 or $6 million to be able to pay for that requirement. There's no reason that we have to wait that long.
Okay, we have a couple minutes left. I just wonder if we could go around the table, and if anybody has any suggestions as far as what we should try and do the next town meeting, either September or next May. What kind of changes would you like to see? Or what needs to be done better?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I think we need a lot more information from the different departments in terms of what their budgets look like before, they come to us in the meeting. Usually we get the information, a couple of weeks in advance, and the information's pretty sketchy. Obviously, how many people are going to get to planning board or capital budget and some of the other committees in town to sit down and listen to, what's being discussed is, I don't know how realistic that is for a lot of people. I certainly will try to make some this year, but I don't think that's going to be consistent. So, I think it would be helpful. We got
Find a way to learn more about the
information.
budgets from the department heads. Almost like a meeting before town meeting.
Yeah.
That'd be good. Adam, do you have any thoughts again?
I'm going to punt on this one for the most part, but what I'm going to say is, this was obviously, we're coming out of my first town meeting. I'm still watching, I'm learning, I was trying to absorb as much as I can, and I'm going to continue to absorb as much as I can, and maybe I will try and go to some of the capital budget meetings and maybe sit in on the Ways and Means Committee meetings, just so I can learn more before I go into the next one, and I can only, give more back to the community and the discourses.
Sure, well, that sounds like a sound approach. Well, good luck in the first year.
Thank you.
There's certainly a lot to learn, a lot of committees that I also kind of drop in on. I wonder if I just have a few seconds just to develop this idea. I think that it would be helpful to the budget if we could apply the cost of benefits to the department, show it as a line item within each department. And that could even include OPEB, because that's where we need to have that money show where it's coming from, what they're actually spending. We can't just hire a library for $50,000, a librarian for $50,000. There's benefits, there's OPEB. All that should be funded right out of their budget.
I think there's merit in that for one major reason. We have two classes of retirees. There are those, the security and safety workers, police and fire department personnel, who can retire at age 55, and they're treated differently.
I think we're running out of time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to our
Hope it's
guests.
been informative.
Yes, thank you to
Thank
the
you for
BCAT staff.
Ernie and Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, our pleasure.